I would never, try to predict the hour or the day. Plenty of people have done that and been completely wrong. But if you were to maybe take a rough estimate, 2000 wouldn't be the worst estimate. And I think, um, by all accounts, we're coming up on 2,000 years from the resurrection of the Christ in 2030 to 34, depending on your dating. So I think it's a really interesting thing, right? And yeah, things are heating up globally, and you've got things like the Pope, who is pushing for a unification with Islam, and he is advocating for a lot of things that Christians would never have said yes to. And you juxtapose that with Daniel predicting the exact day that the Christ would enter Jerusalem. I think it was 180,000. Wait, was it 173,880 days from the decree of Artaxerxes Longimanus? Uh, that's how long it would take before the Christ was revealed, and that, it turns out, was the exact day that Christ entered Jerusalem on a donkey. But then that's followed by, and the people of the prince that shall come are essentially going to kill the Christ. And if taken at face value, the people are the Romans, and the prince that shall come is a reference, or some people believe it's a reference to the Antichrist, right? And if you do a little math there, some would suggest that maybe the Antichrist is going to come out of Rome. I'm sure you've heard that before.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got this really powerful global leader in the form of the Pope, who's pushing for unification of religions and globalism. And you've got things heating up, and wars and rumors of wars, as Christ said, which are sort of a precursor. And
right,
yeah,
along with
a
the
really
scientific aspect of those
Sorry?
things. I said along with the scientific aspect of those things, also merging with what you're talking about.
Oh yeah, and you've got kind of a spiritualism all across the board. I mean, people are dabbling everywhere in spirituality, and in pharmakia, which pharmakia, for those who don't know, is psychedelic drugs, which Paul expressly asked us to avoid. You got people who are dabbling in it, and trying to unlock things that they shouldn't be unlocking. But yeah, it's really interesting. And the multiverse, I mean, well, I think there's a lot of clumsy attempts to explain things. I think one of the most outdated attempts to explain life on Earth is the primordial soup. The primordial soup explanation. So I think that, in my opinion, the multiverse is just another version of the primordial soup. No scientist worth his salt actually takes it seriously, but it's a fun speculation. And of course, when movie studios get a hold of it, it means that they can collaborate and make a lot more money, right? So,
oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's one thing they're definitely doing. I mean, they're merging worlds. I mean, the Spider-Man thing was like one of the highest grossest thing. I mean, I was there, man. I needed to see that immediately. You know what I'm saying? So I get it. It's definitely something that is used for money for sure. But it's just a little concerning, just because as I watch the Doctor Strange movies, they really do push spiritualism a lot. They really do push that, and they connect it with science. And so I really do feel like there's a good push, a propaganda towards making people a very specific kind of spiritual, as long as it's not Christianity. You get me? And so that's definitely something to watch out for. But all right, let's get into the final portion. But what I really wanted to talk to you about as well is something that you do often on your show, and sometimes talk about through different authors, is we're talking about like the moral argument of the existence of God. I just had on someone, his name is Cab Malone. He does like street level apologetics. That's the name of his book. It's called Street Level Apologetics. And he talks to people from like the Hebrew Israelite movement, Mormons, Jehovah's Witness. And, you got to have a pretty strong foundation of the understanding of the Bible if you're going to talk to those folks about God and the real biblical perspective of who God is. That being said, to those who aren't believers, to those who are just atheists, a lot of the arguments is, and I just had one of these actually, is why would God allow certain bad things to happen to people that are seemingly innocent, that they're good people? And for example, I forgot what I said that triggered somebody on Instagram, and they wrote me paragraphs and paragraphs of their thoughts. And at the time, I felt like I had time. I normally don't get involved in those things. It's just, and I feel most of the time it's a kind of waste of time to engage in these online arguments or whatever. But I read it, and he's like, "Hey, I have a real question. I really want to know. I want to believe," which is what caught my eye. Why would God let babies get killed and raped in, I forgot what country or whatever he mentioned? If God is real and all powerful, why would he let that happen? I'm sure you've heard that kind of question. I mean, it is said that in the world of apologetics in defense of the Bible, there's only like 10 or 15 questions that people ask, and they rephrase them, and there really isn't many questions. It's just the same question, kind of revised. So what are your thoughts on that, man?
Well, yeah, I think that the moral argument is obviously one that, it's the easiest, I think, to answer, but it also requires a lot of anecdotes. And I don't always have the most anecdotes at hand and, just ready in my pocket, waiting to go. But I think that, the obvious answer, and it's probably one that you've heard before, is that evil allows for meaningful action. So if, there's no existence of evil, for example, if we can't have our Messiah nailed to a cross of wood and hung to die, then there's no meaningful action. There's no displays of love. Um, so I think that, there are, horrible atrocities happening all over the earth. But one thing I always keep in mind as well is that, this is a blip in the scheme of eternity. When you think about it, our time on this earth is nothing when you consider the grand scheme of everything. And that doesn't do away with, somebody doing something evil to someone else or an evil thing happening. But we also have to think that evil is not what, it's not what a lot of people think of it as. I think a lot of the world, and mostly, I would say namely Asia and perhaps North America, fall into the Eastern understanding of evil, which is the sort of yin and yang kind of evil. That good and evil are this sort of beautiful, harmonious duet that kind of rely on each other, and evil is this is things that make us feel uncomfortable, and good is things that make us feel good and cuddly, right? And therefore, all kinds of things are good to them. Like, for example, taking a drug makes smoking weed or getting drunk makes me feel good. So therefore, how could this be evil, right? But that's not the way that the what we would call the Aristotelian perspective works, or the Aristotelian is also the Christian perspective. The Christian perspective is that evil is what we would call a derivative of good. So, for example, you have God who's complete, lacking nothing. He is perfection, in that he has no there's nothing that would ever need to be changed. And there are philosophers who would explicate that a little better. I always recommend Edward Fazer's book, Five Proofs of the Existence of God. But more or less, he's this fully complete being. And you have humans who they're full of potential, right? Potentiality, philosophically speaking, right? There's lots of things that can change within us, lots of work that needs to be done. And by philosophical definition, that is evil. Now, people kind of cringe when they hear that. They think, oh, my goodness, what do you mean evil? Like, is a baby evil because it hasn't grown up into, an adult? Is someone evil because they are lacking, perhaps if they have an injury or they're missing a limb? And by God's standard, that's what we would call an evil, which is what Christ philosophically or came to fix, which is philosophically consistent with Aristotle. He took these things that had potentiality, like maybe someone who's missing a limb, or somebody who can't walk, or somebody who is blind, and he fulfilled their potential, thereby ridding them of an evil, right? So this evil, I believe God allows it to exist for meaningful action, first of all, but um, it's also worth noting that he specifically did allow it to exist, and it's not just some sort of happenstance or a mistake, because it's also a way that he displays his purest form of love. It's the way that he interacts with humanity and shows them that he is all powerful, forgiving, and loving. And it's also a teaching tool. It's something that allows us to learn, and we see that the scriptures are replete with examples of that.
Indeed. I was going to say, like, looking back, I mean, the way I answered it, I think I remember what triggered that question was someone posted some video of something bad happening on Earth. They were like, "Oh, like why is this happening? Why is this happening? And why would God allow it?" And I just said that the this happening isn't proof that God doesn't exist. It's proof that we, as a society, aren't living according to how we're supposed to live morally. And one of the things I see in the Old Testament, and I think there's two people at fault here, the way we understand things and the way things are taught. And in the Christian world, there is this understanding that God kind of, unfortunately, the way they speak or teach it is that he seems to be a micromanager God. Like he can just, that's what he's supposed to be doing, all God's and everything. And he's in every single decision that you make. And he's just kind of, guiding it all. And that, along with he's omnipresent and he's omnipotent, messes with the idea of who he really is. And so I feel like people think, well, if he's in everything and he has all the power, why doesn't he just fix stuff? Right? That's the idea. But very early on, you see God creating Adam and Eve, and you see Cain and Abel, and all of that story unfold. And never was God saying, nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to let you do that. No, I'm not going to let you do that. No. Throughout the entire Old Testament, he would often let people make their own decisions. And out of the chaos that we created, he would make something good out of it, right? And which is what Romans is all about, right? Romans chapter 8. It's just, he often warns us that the authority given to us can literally make paradise on earth. Like, we can do that because he gave us that authority to do so, but we are not willing to do the work that is what results in creating this paradise or this kingdom. And so because that happened very early on, obviously we fell for it, delegated our authority to our adversary. And then there is that aspect of it, of a whole actual spiritual evil. There's a spiritual component to that as well. But I'm not one to blame all things that are evil. Oh, Satan did it. The fallen ones did it. Because above them, especially now, after the crucifixion of Jesus, do we have authority to change those things? They no longer have that authority over everything and say, oh, the devil did it, Satan did it. And say, well, do we have this authority or not? Because we do. And so I like to bring that up to people and say, hey, man, God doesn't micromanage. And he gave you authority to do what Jesus did. And Jesus said you can do greater things than he did. So if anything, we have to live up to our potential, to what we can do and really change the world around. And I feel that making more Christians, expanding the kingdom, in other words, contributes to that. But I think there's a lot more to it, of course, and there's a lot more nuance. But that's just kind of like the general thing. I think people need to understand God is not a micromanager. He doesn't work that way.
Sure, yeah. And, I think that you make some fantastic points. And it's also worth noting, though, that, there's no amounts, attributing this to Job and Job's friends telling him that he made some mistake. So he had some lack of righteousness that God was dealing with in terms of the treatment that he was getting from the adversary. But when you look at for example, Paul, right? He had all kinds of things happen to him while he was on earth and after he had converted to Christianity, and he was clearly a messenger of God, and he was indwelt by the Holy Spirit. I once heard, and this was a gentleman who got brought up a lot the last time that we spoke, but it was Chuck Missler say, I wouldn't want to be on board whatever ship Paul was on, because wherever he was going, basically, there was some